Let me ask you a question. Do you think that modern Christians see Jesus in our day-to-day lives? As we do mundane things, do we have visions so as to see how God is involved in them? When we do the dishes, when we wash our clothes, when we go to our jobs or do our jobs at home now, when we exercise, when we're eating, when we go through our daily routines, do we experience God in those times, or are we too caught up in the rituals of life that we forget to look for God in those moments? Or maybe a better question is, do we even believe that God can be in those moments? In the story found in Luke 24:13 through 35, two of Jesus' disciples, they are out on Easter morning traveling on their way to a local village called Emmaus. And what we know is that Emmaus is about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And to make this journey, they are traveling on foot and they're walking, something most of us in normal circumstances would do just about every day without thinking much about it. And as they are out walking, they're chatting it up about what's going on in their lives. And the big events that are going on in their lives at that time was that they had been faithfully following Jesus for a very long time, observing him, learning from him, feeling valued by him. But then suddenly, in a terrible turn of events, Jesus is condemned to death, crucified, and dies. And when he dies, it's as if their hope dies with him. And we know that their hopes die with him because in Luke 24:21, it tells us that these disciples, that they had hoped that Jesus would be the one, the Messiah, who would redeem Israel. And what redemption likely meant from their perspective was that they were hoping that Jesus would help to lead a revolution to topple the Roman Empire that was occupying Israel at the time. And so now, with Jesus gone, these disciples, they're devastated. Their hopes have come crashing down around them with Jesus' death. Let me ask you, what hopes in your life have been extinguished because of something that's happened to you? Sometimes we have hopes that are little things, right? We hope to see March Madness, but we're frustrated when it's canceled. We hope to have coffee with somebody, but we can't meet them. We want to go out to eat, but we're not able to do that. We don't get to go to the beach. They're little things, but sometimes we have these hopes and they're extinguished. Sometimes, though, that they're a bit bigger. Sometimes we physically can't go to church. Sometimes that vacation that you've been planning, looking forward to all year, it's been canceled. Sometimes you really just don't get kind of adequate time to rest apart from others, because now that we're quarantined, we're all together all the time. And sometimes when we look at what our hopes are, they're actually far bigger than any of these things, right? They're hopes that feel emotionally catastrophic. We lose a job, a loved one or a family member dies. We feel like, and it is the case, that disaster strikes for us. Jesus' death is a catastrophic loss for these disciples. And actually what we read is that they aren't just talking as they're walking. What they seem to be doing is commiserating. And we know this because if we read verse 17, it tells us that even just at looking at these disciples, they still look sad. But amidst this sadness, maybe their early onset depression even, amidst this sadness, this crazy thing happens. 3 days later, there have been these reports, and these reports say that Jesus' body is missing from the tomb, and that women disciples have seen a vision of angels. And these angels have said that Jesus is still alive somehow. And the others have gone to the tomb. They've confirmed that indeed Jesus' body is gone. But if you're these disciples on the road to Emmaus, it would be pretty understandable that you might be skeptical about all these reports. After all, they don't seem very logical. If you know that the people who have seen them are mourning. You know that sometimes when people are mourning, we tend to be irrational about things. And if we're being honest, hearing reports of angels by super sad people looking now starkly at questions of ultimate meaning, now that kind of sounds like it's fabricated. And yet, at the same time, these are the same disciples, the same people who literally saw Jesus perform miracles when they were with him. They saw Jesus say and do things that were astounding. So maybe experiencing all of that would help you to consider what these women had said, what these other disciples had said. At any rate, they obviously had a lot to talk about. And so now these disciples, out on their walk, talking things up, they have someone approach them who has assumedly overheard their conversation. This person comes up to them and wants to know, hey, what are you talking about? And little do they know, when they start telling the story, that they are actually preaching to the choir, because the person who has come up to them actually is Jesus. Now, this is where the story gets super weird, because verse 16 tells us that even though this is Jesus, these disciples' eyes are kept from recognizing him, whatever that means. So we don't know what that means. We don't know if that means that there's some kind of psychological depression going on that's keeping them from recognizing him. We don't know if something literally happens to their eyes and physiologically they're unable to see him or recognize him now. Or maybe it's the case that Jesus himself is like shapeshifter Jesus, and he can look differently to different people after his resurrection. Personally, that's what I think's going on here. I have no way of explaining how that could be the case physically, but there is a famous Christian historian from Yale named Jaroslav Pelikan. If you don't know who he is, Wikipedia him. But Pelikan wrote these two books, Jesus Through the Centuries and Mary Through the Centuries, which talk about how people have experienced Jesus in their lives throughout history. And one of the astounding phenomenon that happens over and over is when people throughout history have attested to seeing apparitions of Jesus or Mary, they often see him or her as people that look like they do. And I think there might be a reason for this. I think because Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. And sometimes one of our superficial boundaries that we put up is that when people don't look like us, sometimes we think they can't relate to us. And maybe the divine reality of a resurrected human being is that we are not bound to looking like we currently do. Maybe we have the freedom to look differently, to be transformed in our appearance. And this makes observational sense to me at least, because we don't look the same as a baby as we do when we're a child, or when we're a teenager or a young adult or older adult or senior citizen. Our bodies are constantly changing. In the Bible, when Jesus is transfigured, he looks differently. When Moses goes before God, he comes down looking differently. So it would make sense that Jesus, God with us, would appear to us in a way that would help us to come to him in a way and be more accepting of him. It would make sense that when we're resurrected as well, that we might have another change, albeit a far grander one, physically happen to us, in addition to all of these things we see throughout of our life. And I think that something different is definitely going on for sure, because he literally disappears from their sight in Luke 24:31. And that's not something, at least at this stage in my life, I'm able to do easily. So what that says to me, and what this is interesting is for the disciples, is that who've been with Jesus presumably for a fairly long time, prior to his death, is that something is radically different about Jesus, that they don't recognize him until he performs this ritual action of breaking bread that we've come to know as the Lord's Supper. And what's even stranger is, they don't recognize his appearance, but it's more than that too. They've heard Jesus talk before, and they don't recognize his voice. And if you have heard someone speak enough, you know that they have speech patterns. They have certain inflections. Every one of us has certain inflections in our voice, stuff that makes each one of us fairly recognizable. If my wife calls me my name in a crowded room, I don't even have to see her to know that it's her. If I hear her laugh, even without seeing her, I know it's her. If she is singing in a huge choir full of people and I just hear the recording, I can clearly hear her voice amidst the crowd, and I know it's her. But these disciples who have been with Jesus for a really long time, they don't recognize Jesus. So what's going on here? Because this obviously isn't just about their eyes. It also makes me wonder, if you or I die, and when we die, if we're able to reappear to someone in a resurrected form, but we look different, we sounded different, everything about us appeared different, would there be something in our lives that we've done that people would still know that it was us? If you're looking for a movie to watch during quarantine, there's this old 1998 kind of cheesy fantasy movie with Robin Williams called What Dreams May Come, which artistically imagines a story about a man who dies and what happens to him after death. And while I obviously don't agree with everything that happens theologically in this movie, it's a piece of fiction obviously, but there's this really cool scene where Robin Williams' character is reunited with his son after death, except at first, he doesn't recognize him because his son has chosen to be a different ethnicity. And it's only after spending time with his son that Williams discovers who he really is, that he is his son, and he knows that it's him because of the prior relationships and time that he has invested with him. And that kind of brings back our original question. Do you think that modern Christians see Jesus in our day-to-day lives? Do we have enough of a relationship with Jesus that we can see him in our daily lives? You know, just over 5 years ago, I was on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. The Daily Show asked me to do a comedy bit about artificial intelligence and Christianity. And that was a big decision for me because at the time I was really the only pastor in the world who was openly talking about AI and religion. And while today many of those ideas have been more popularized, back then it was something of a vocational risk to be on a satirical show talking about God and robots. My hope, which fortunately later happened, was that serious journalists would see the show and dig into these issues more deeply. But going into the show, I didn't know if that was going to happen for sure. And the risk was that I could just come out of that interview looking like a crazy person. And I have to tell you, I really struggled. I struggled deeply with the decision as to whether I should risk myself in this or not. So I prayed about it. And after a while, I really felt like God was calling me to do it. And so they flew me to New York City. There was a blizzard outside at the time, and our flight was rerouted twice, and we ended up landing in New Jersey. And by the time I got to my hotel, it was really late, and they film really early in the morning, so I got maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep at best. And so I show up on the set, and when you get there, they make you sign all of your rights away, and they preface you signing their documentation by saying that even presidents who are on the show, they have to sign this. So you're pretty much left completely vulnerable. And here I am, tired, signed my rights away, and then that's followed up with this barrage of theological questions that don't have the intention of actually getting to a point of real understanding, because that isn't the point of the bit. Now, Fortunately, the show's editors, they were relatively kind in post-production, but during the questioning on The Daily Show, which was admittedly pretty aggressive, correspondent Jordan Klepper asked me something to the effect of, how do you even know that Jesus is real? How do you even know that Jesus is real? And I'll never forget that moment, because in it, I felt humiliated. I was tired, I was fatigued, I wasn't as quick as I normally might have been, and I answered in a way, regardless of what anyone else thought, I wasn't satisfied with. I truthfully don't even remember what I said. All I remember is how I felt afterwards. I felt like I had failed. And maybe this sounds silly, but I felt like I had failed Jesus himself. Of course, I know that's not true. First off, because Jesus, simply being Jesus, could do whatever without us. It doesn't seem like he wants to do that. He's constantly inviting us to participate in his redemptive purposes on earth. But more than that, I see Jesus every day in little things, and I see God working through people as they help one another through crisis. So I know that Jesus is real, because I hear Jesus' voice in phone calls through other people. I see Christ in people's generosity as they give to the church to allow us to help other people. I see God's grace in the basic provision that I have before me every day: food to eat, air to breathe. Just in the fact that I'm living life, I see God. I see Christ clearly in that. And yet at the same time, if I'm being honest, it's so easy, just so easy to fail to see Jesus in our everyday lives as well. I mean, these disciples on the road to Emmaus who were physically with him, and I'm certainly no better than they weren't able to see him. So often I fail to give thanks for the things that I'm blessed with. I fail to adequately show people the love of God. And for all sorts of reasons, I don't always live up to the calling that God has blessed me with. And as I think about this, it makes me think, wow, it sure is easier to be kind of a bandwagon believer, to just have faith when it's popular. But do we have the fortitude to keep the faith and have faith when it's not popular? Do we have the desire to have faith when it's not cool? Do we stay devout when we fail? Do we still have faith when things are hard in our lives or difficult in the life of the church? Do we maintain our faith when it means that we have to give up something that we want, or worse yet, that we're addicted to? When we lose, do we give up on faith because it simply doesn't fit our hopes of what our life should be like? I wonder about these things all the time. You know, recently, since we've been forced to be at home so much, my 5-year-old son, Paxton, and I, we've been hanging out a lot more. And one of the things that we like to do together is we play video games. He loves to play Minecraft on his iPad while I play whatever game I play on our TV. And sometimes, because the games are so advanced, he likes to watch me play a game. And so we've kind of made a habit while we've been in quarantine of playing games a couple hours a week together. And this past week, I was playing this game, and Paxton was watching me, and for like an hour and a half, I was working at beating a level in this game. I was really into it, and at the end, I got really close to winning, and out of nowhere, the level boss came and smacked down my character, and I just lost. And after it happened, I went, no! And Paxton, not knowing or actually knowing what had just happened, and still concerned by my exclamation, said, well, what's wrong, Daddy? And I said, well, I'm mad because I just wasted an hour and a half of my life playing this darn game only to lose. And with the wisdom of a child, he looked right into my eyes and he said, "But you like hanging out with me, right? So it's okay." At that moment, I felt simultaneously ashamed and grateful. And I just instantly teared up. I didn't really know what to do or to say except to say, of course I do. You are so right. I love you so much. And I pulled him in to hug him. You know, brothers and sisters, I am so grateful that Christ keeps showing up for me day after day like that. Because it's in that moment that Christ revealed my blessings and my blindness through the words of a child. And my son, like Jesus, genuinely only had concern for me. He wasn't trying to condemn me. He only had love for me. He just wanted me to see. And yet, as soon as I did see clearly, I was immediately convicted of the reality that there are so many times that I miss when Christ is present right now in my life. There's so many times and things and people that I take for granted. Let me ask you, where do you see Jesus in your life in ways that maybe you're taking it for granted? How and where is Jesus showing up for you day after day when things are good or when things are truly difficult? Has Jesus been right in front of you maybe all along, but you've been unable to see him or unwilling to see him for some reason? Brothers and sisters, when we endure great trials and struggles together, when we celebrate great victories and successes together, and all those times that are in between, my prayer is that we all would have hearts. We would all have hearts to see our blessings and to see how the risen Lord is loving us presently amidst the complexities of our lives. I pray these things for you and me. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.